Hello, everybody. My name is John Lee. I am a bassist and a producer of music. And frankly, I didn't know I was all alone here. So I'm just going to talk about my career and life. Um, I've had a great career in jazz, which has been a love of mine since I was a child. Um, my father was both of my parents actually were big jazz fans, and there was a lot of music in the house. My father actually was a bassist, and he played all the bass clef instruments when he was in the Navy, and decided to have a career in music for a little while until he got what is referred to as the calling, which is what ministers refer to as the moment in their lives when they feel like they've got a message from above to become a minister, or in some cases priests. But he never lost his love of jazz, and our house was always full of music. My mother was a great fan of uh, Carmen McRae and Arthur Prysock, Brooke Benton, and Sarah Vaughan was my favorite singer. And my father loved Miles and Dizzy, and a lot of big bands, Count Basie, Duke Ellington. So the house was always filled with music, and which had a big impression on all of us, all five of us. I'm the oldest uh, of four, and plus my first cousin lived with us. And I was very blessed to have a great teacher in grade school. I studied string bass from about fourth grade uh, till 11th grade with a woman named Carolyn Lush. She taught violin, viola, cello, and string bass in the public schools. In those days, public schools had much better music departments than, from what I hear, is offered these days in most communities. And I studied classically right through 11th grade. And at that point, we moved to Philadelphia. My father was promoted to a church in Philadelphia, which became a great starting point because I met so many up and coming musicians there. Most notably, a drummer that I went to high school with, Jerry Brown. We became best friends in those days, and we went to a school in Philadelphia called Overbrook High School, which was the largest high school in Philadelphia. Um, and they had what was called the Music Magnet program. So students could audition from all over Philadelphia to attend Overbrook High School and have a little more in-depth music training. And after my high school graduation, Jerry and I both were accepted to what was then called the Philadelphia Musical Academy, which is now known as University of the Arts. And there were quite a few older musicians that were juniors and seniors that were very inspiring to us, most notably the bassist Stanley Clark. He was a junior when we started as freshmen, and already quite a force on the local scene there in Philadelphia. And it's funny, during my, I guess my sophomore year, Stanley started playing with groups in New York, and he called me one day and said, "Let's go up to the Aqua Lounge. I'm subbing with Joe Henderson's band." So I went up with him and the rhythm section happened to be Lenny White and Chick Corea. And that was the moment Chick first heard Stanley, which was kind of his big break in those days. And he was already working with Pharoah Sanders and Joe Henderson and Horace Silver. And he very generously shared his connections with all of us. And I guess in my sophomore year, our school had a special program that if our dean approved of the artists, we were allowed to go on the road if we were jazz majors, and get some on-hand training right on the road. And Stanley encouraged me in the late winter of 1972 to go to New York for an audition with Max Roach. Max had lost his band for a period because his bassist at the time was Reggie Workman, and Reggie went on a long tour in South America with Stanley Cowell and Charles Tolliver. And at the same time, his horn players at the time were Billy Harper and Cecil Bridgewater. And they went on a long tour with Dad Jones and Mel Lewis to Russia and Europe. So all of a sudden, Max didn't have a band. And Stanley said, "Why don't you go up and audition?" He said, "You won't get the gig, but it'll be a good experience for you." So Jerry drove me up to New York that Sunday morning. He had a car. Most of us didn't. And the next day, Max called and hired me for 3 months. And I went in on Monday morning and told the dean that I wanted to go on the road. And he kind of smirked and said, "With who?" And I said, "Max Roach." And he dropped his pen and looked up at me with amazement and said, "This is going to be great for you. And this is the required work you'll have to do while you're on the road. But good luck." And that was it. I went on the road. The problem was, after about 4 days with Max, I had learned more than I had learned the entire semester about the music that I loved, and decided I think I'll take some time off from school and see what more can happen here. And it's funny, Max used to come to my room every morning. Our first job was in Pittsburgh for about 10 days at a jazz club. And he came to my room every morning with the New York Times and some brushes. And I had my upright bass in the room, and he would fluff the paper up in a certain kind of way on my bed, pull up a chair, and he got a great sound out of this fluffed up New York Times, and would just play with me and give me pointers. And it was incredible, actually. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And finally, that semester was over, and Max's band came back, and he encouraged me to continue my studies and get my degree and then come to New York. But I had learned so much from him that I wanted to see what would happen on my own. And I was coming to New York a lot, and I was subbing for Stanley with Pharoah Sanders now and then, and Joe Henderson when he couldn't make it. He was like the new sensation of the bass at that time. So gigs were coming to him left and right. And that learning process continued because I got a chance to play with, in Joe Henderson's band at the time was Woody Shaw and Hal Galper and Joe Chambers. And then it was really exciting. And one day Stanley called me, and I came up to in New York to hang with him. And he said, "Come on, we're going over Herbie Hancock's house." And I was like, "Whoa, okay." So we're at Herbie's house, and he's playing all kind of music for us. It was 1972, and he pulled out a record of a Dutch flautist named Chris Henze, who was also on CBS Records at that time. And he said, this is a friend of mine who's trying to explore the same avenues that I am with the music right now. And he's looking for a bassist to come over and play with him for a year and travel all over Europe. And Stanley said, well, I just got the gig with Chick permanently, so I'm going to be doing that, but John might be interested. So Herbie gave me the album, gave me an address, and said, send a tape over if you're interested, which I did. And, in those days, phone calls were very expensive and mail was slow. There were no fax machines and so forth. About 2 weeks later, I heard from him, and he said, I want you to come over and join my band, and can you bring the drummer that was on your tape? And that was Jerry Brown. So Jerry and I, that August, in the end of August, we moved to Holland, also known as the Netherlands. And we started playing in Chris Hensey's band. And we were lucky because we had one American neighbor, a great alto saxophonist, Charlie Mariano, became like a surrogate dad to us while we were there. And we played in Chris's band for about a year and a half, and then we had developed contacts there. So we started also working with other great European musicians, most notably a great Belgian guitarist, Philip Catherine, and a German pianist who was very well known at the time named Joachim Kuhn. And that continued on until about the fall of '74. And we both decided to come back to New York because that was the Mecca. That's where the action was. So we came back to New York. And right away, I started working with Lonnie Liston Smith and Joe Henderson occasionally, and Farrow now and then. And that winter, I was asked to join Larry Coryell's band. Larry Coryell, it was at the time Larry Coryell and the 11th House. And the whole fusion movement had taken a foot, and it was quite overwhelming. I mean, we were doing long tours and big concerts, and I stayed with Larry. I guess it was about 2.5 years in that band, playing with the great Alphonse Mouzon and wonderful trumpet player Mike Lawrence. Some people might know him from Joe Henderson's Power to the People album. And at the same time, Jerry and I kind of had our own little band, and we had put a record out in Holland, in Europe actually, called Infinite Jones. And that was doing well. So we were kind of back and forth between Europe and the States. And Jerry went off to play with Michael Urbaniak, and a violinist from Poland, was living in the States then. And he also went auditioned for Chicorea's band. I think it was a Music Magic band with Stanley Clarke, and after Lenny had left. And he was working with Chick for a while. And then when that was over, I guess that takes us up to around 1978 or so. And Jerry and I had done 2 recordings for Blue Note Records. And we had done 2 for Columbia Records. So we started touring with our own bands till a little more R&B than was mine. And he went off to LA, and we kind of went our separate ways at that time. He began playing with Lionel Richie, and I continued working in New York and going to Europe a lot, 4 or 5 times a year, because there was work there for myself until 1982. Great alto saxophonist Gary Bartz recommended me to McCoy Tyner. And by then I was playing mostly electric bass. And McCoy had made a recording I forget the name of it, but he was exploring some different roads there. He had made a recording with Stanley Clarke and Carlos Santana and a vocalist named Siobhan Wright. Actually, Phyllis Hyman was on the recording, but Siobhan was in the band. And he hired me on the electric bass until I guess that was lasted about 2.5 years. And we toured the world with that band, made one recording called Dimensions. And finally, around June '84, um, McCoy went back to his trio, just an acoustic trio, and broke that band up. And it wasn't maybe a month later, Bob Cranshaw, who was my mentor, uh, who also was known for playing jazz on the electric bass. Bob called me one day and said, "Hey, what are you doing Friday?" And I said, "Actually, I'm subbing for you on a gig. Remember with Harold Osley?" And he said, "Oh, forget that. I'll cover that." He said, "You're going to go to Memphis with Dizzy." And I said, "What? You serious?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." And about an hour later, Dizzy called me, told me to meet him at the airport, LaGuardia Airport, at a certain time, and I did, and flew down to Memphis. And thank God I knew a lot of his music. Um, and at the end of that night, I went to get paid, and I went up to Dizzy's suite, and he had laid out his entire schedule on a table and said, "Hey, man, take a look at my schedule." And I looked at it, and it was incredible. It was like gigs all over the world, a tour of India, cruises, uh, European tours, Far East tours. And I said, "Wow, that's pretty incredible." He said, "Yeah, there's some good jobs there." He called them jobs. And he said, "How'd you like to do them with me?" And I said, "Seriously?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm going." I said, "That would be great." And he said, "Well, I got to go away for 2 weeks, and I'll call you, let you know what time to be at the airport for the next gig." And so he gave me a copy of the schedule. I didn't hear from him until the night before the gig, and he calls me up. He said, "Hey, man, you doing this gig with me tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah, I thought you wanted me to do all the gigs with you." He said, "Oh yeah, okay, just checking, just checking." And that was the beginning of the next 10 years of my life up until Dizzy's passing in 1993. The quintet and his traditional big band, which he called the Anniversary Big Band. Did quite a few tours with that band, and his Grammy-winning United Nation Orchestra, which was a wonderful experience. Musicians from all over the world, uh, mostly south of the border. Dizzy used to say, "I love the music south of the border." But it was Paquito de Rivera and Arturo Sandoval and a very young Danilo Perez, James Moody, uh, Steve Turre, Claudio Roditi. So many great musicians in that band. Slide Hampton, um, Ayrton Moriera, and Ignacio Baroa, and the great Giovanni Hidalgo. And we toured with that band, I guess, until about '91. And then his next big project, the last big tours we did were with Miriam Makeba. And that was really interesting because both bands toured together, and the show would start with both bands on stage and Dizzy and Miriam together, and then they would leave, we'd do our thing, and then Miriam would do the next set, and then we'd all join together for the final two songs of the show. And that takes us right up to when Dizzy got sick, unfortunately, in the spring of 1992. And I could go on for hours about those years and all the great experiences and Dizzy's great influence over all of us musically and as human beings. He was, as most of you know, uh, had a profound wisdom and generosity that he shared with all of us. Um, after Dizzy passed away, about a year later, his wife, Lorraine, called me and said, uh, you know, you were the straw boss in the band. The straw boss means I handled a lot of the business for him, and uh, it's an old term. Uh, why don't you put something together and keep the music going? And I said, Lorraine, you can't really have a ghost band with who's going to play Dizzy. And she said, well, think of something, and at the time I was producing records again, and I had a fair amount of success on a few tracks I produced for a great vocalist named John Lucien with Shawnee Records. And they asked me, you know, is there a pet project you'd like to do or your own album? I said, I'd like to do a tribute to Dizzy album. And we did an album, myself with John Faddis, a very young Antonio Hart and Cyrus Chestnut, and great tenor man from Argentina, Andres Boyarsky, Ignacio Baroa, Duduca de Fonseca. We did an album called Dizzy's 80th Birthday Party. And the record did well, and we started getting dates. And we actually started touring as like what we call the Dizzy Gillespie Alumni All-Stars. About 2 years after that, we started the big band back, and started working a lot with the big band. And that's kind of led us to this moment now, because those bands do still exist with different personnel. And we actually have a third band that's doing quite well called Dizzy Gillespie's Afro-Latin Experience, which explores Dizzy's love for what he called all the music south of the border, or sometimes he called it the music of the illegal aliens, but all in jest. But as many of you know, aside from his great contribution with fusing Afro-Latin rhythms, Afro-Cuban rhythms, I should say, with jazz and his famous compositions like Manteca and Tintendale, Dizzy also had a great love of Brazilian music, and was the first to start recording the music of Antonio Carlos Jobim with Dizzy on the Riviera. Was a record that my father bought when I was 10 years old, and I remember how struck I was by Desafinado. It sounded so fresh and new. And at the time, he had discovered a pianist in Argentina by the name of Lalo Schifrin, who he brought back to America. He's a great arranger, great composer, as many of you know. And he ended up writing the main theme song for Mission Impossible. As I always say, that was the end of his jazz career. He kind of took off in that world. And I always say Lalo is still with us, and he's still earning money on Mission Impossible, because they made Mission Impossible 39 last year, I think. So the Afro-Latin Experience explores a lot of the music that he commissioned and that he wrote himself, that from influences from Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, of course, and the Caribbean, and Spain. And we'll actually be at the Blue Note this Monday, September 27th. If you're around New York, come on out. Yeah. I thought this was an interview, so I'm talking freely and trying to do my best here. But it's funny. Unfortunately, my father passed away before I started working with Diz, because Dizzy was his favorite, and we had a lot of Dizzy Gillespie records around the house. And I could have never imagined in my wildest dreams that I would actually end up playing with him and play this great music that I grew up on. But here we are now. And let's see. Well, it's so nice to see us getting back to live music after this long pandemic break. Hopefully, we'll continue our upward momentum here with more live gigs, and things will start to progress and get better. I know people are anxious to hear live music, and we're anxious to play live again. Live stream just wasn't doing it. So, um, let's see. Yeah, I'm still producing records. I had a great success 2 years ago on a joint production with Chucho Valdez, the great Cuban piano player, on his Jazz Batu 2 album, which we recorded here in my studio, in my home. And we won the Best Latin Jazz Album Grammy for that, 2019. And a lot of exciting projects going on. I just finished producing a wonderful trombonist, Ron Wilkins, and his album was just released. It's called Trombocalist. He's a wonderful vocalist and trombonist. And I'm finishing an album from a great talent on the tenor and the Iwi and the soprano by the name of Steve Carrington. And I'm also working on a new record, recording this, just kind of getting to the editing and mixing stage with great alto saxophonist Mark Gross. And last but not least, a very exciting duo album with the great Cyrus Chestnut on piano and Roberta Gambarini, wonderful vocalist from Italy, who's had a few Grammy nominations and lives here in the United States, and I have the pleasure of working with now and then. And so things are busy, and I want to wish everybody well, stay safe, and let's keep this music alive and pray for more a continued health and good spirits in our community. We've lost quite a lot of great musicians in the last 3 years, and there's so many wonderful musicians coming up, young musicians that I hear all the time. And let's see. I think that's about it for now. I could talk forever here, but according to my clock, I think our time is just about up. So I want to thank Carol and Claire for this wonderful. You know what? I got to thank Gail Boyd for having me on here, and this is a wonderful thing she's doing, and Ina Ditka for recommending me to do this broadcast. Anyway, there's a little insight into my world, and I guess that's it for now. Can't think of anything else at the moment.